Wide receivers that I think are probably low-end wide receiver threes, but do have upside for higher finishes are Darnell Mooney, Tyler Lockett, Jacoby Myers, and QJ. Darnell Mooney at times has been the most targeted player in this Falcons offense. I don't think that's going to be the regular. I think he's going to finish second or third in general. Pitts and him should switch from week to week. However, he's a very good player. I don't like him as much in this matchup as I have in some of the prior matchups, but I do think that he possesses an incredibly safe floor with a decent ceiling, especially if he's able to score a touchdown. They should have to throw a decent amount to stay in this game, and so he does possess a good amount of upside potentially. Tyler Lockett against Detroit, it's a fantastic matchup. He has been overtaken by JSN, though, in terms of snap share over the course of 3 weeks in a row. And so with Tyler Lockett, I do think he's going to start waning in terms of his fantasy production, but in plus matchups that should also be high scoring, I think he can start all three of the wide receivers. I love Geno Smith this week. And so I think that Tyler Lockett does have a decent amount of upside. I just think that the floor is a lot lower with JSN out snapping him now. Jacoby Myers is now the wide receiver one for week 4 with Devontae Adams out. He's facing Cleveland. I think what's going to happen is Brock Bowers is by far and away going to be the top target earner in this offense, and I think the rest of the targets are going to be somewhat evenly distributed. I think, for instance, Trey Tucker gets a couple extra looks this week. I think that Michael Mayer does as well as the Raiders running backs. And so I don't think any one particular wide receiver stands to benefit that much because of the approach I think they're going to take. But I could be wrong, and if there was a wide receiver you want to start this week, it's probably Jacoby Myers over Trey Tucker, but it is anyone's guess as to how that's going to shake up with Adams out. With QJ, he has had 2 very good weeks in a row. I would caution people, though, in weeks 2 and 3, he scored touchdowns on busted coverages where the defense just didn't play their coverage correctly. And so there's just been nobody on him. And so I think that's inflated his fantasy finishes just a little bit if you really watch the film. I did a breakdown on his week 2 performance. He has improved as a player, though, and I don't mean that as a slight to him. I'm just saying that you need to be a little bit careful with that because especially this past week, the volume wasn't there for him. And in this matchup against Kansas City, I really don't like that against McDuffie. And so I think there are a lot more safe plays this week, but he does carry a reasonable amount of upside because he, to be fair to him, has been scoring touchdowns. Wide receivers that I think are probably mid to high-end wide receiver threes this week are Xavier Worthy, Garrett Wilson, J-Mo, Khalil Shakir, Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, and Juwan Jennings. Xavier Worthy is playing against the Chargers this week. He's going to match up, I think, a good amount with Asante Samuel Jr. I don't like that for him. He is faster, obviously. But I think he gets a couple chunk gains, and I think he gets some looks in the running game. And so he is an incredibly high upside play. It's just that the floor is almost nothing, at least until we see more targets per game for him. But a very high upside flex play. With Garrett Wilson, I love Garrett Wilson. This is probably the lowest I'm ever going to have him in any rankings. He is going to be facing, in my opinion, shadow coverage throughout the entirety of this game from Pat Surtain. He is one of the best cover corners in the NFL. And so until we see more high-end production from Garrett Wilson, which will come as he stops facing the most elite stretch of cornerbacks I've probably ever seen for a wide receiver. I mean, seriously, look at his schedule, who he's played and who he still has to play. I've never even heard of a wide receiver that's been put in such a terrible situation for cornerbacks he's going to have to face. I don't know why they did this to him, but they did. And so I think he's a safe floor play. He's going to get a good amount of volume. It's just that is a matchup I personally would want to avoid. But if you drafted Garrett Wilson, I don't know how you could bench him. I would just caution people to not expect a very high upside game this week against Surtain. J-Mo is playing the Seahawks this week. matching up against Reek Woolen, most likely, I'd imagine. Witherspoon could play him from time to time. Unfortunately for JMO, Reek is fast enough to hang with him. I don't think we have a ceiling game from JMO, but he has gotten a good amount of usage in 2 of the first 3 weeks. And until we see him consistently not get that kind of usage, I think he deserves to be relatively high in our weekly rankings. And in a matchup where he's not facing off against Reek Woolen, I would have him a lot higher based on how he's played. Khalil Shakir matches up against Baltimore this week. I do like that for him. I think he might see a little bit of coverage from Wiggins, who is fast enough to contend with him. But with Josh Allen throwing him the ball, he's starting to become a consistent player for us in fantasy. And somebody in this offense is going to step up on a regular basis. And so far, it's looked as though he's a good candidate to be that player. Calvin Ridley against Miami. It could go either way. He might see some Jalen Ramsey, but I think Ramsey probably will split time between him and DeAndre Hopkins, or if anything, mostly play Hopkins. And so I think that will free up Calvin Ridley somewhat. It's really up to Will Levis as to if any of these playmakers are going to have a good game. So hopefully for them, he can sling some touchdowns and not throw a bunch of picks and fumble the whole game. But we'll see about that. Terry McLaurin is playing the Cardinals this week. He had a very good game this past week. He caught one of the best touchdowns through a pass interference that I've seen this season. He's always been an incredible player, trapped with horrible quarterback play. This week, I think he's a safe floor play. I don't like the matchup as much as I did this past week, but Terry McLaurin is a very good player, so there is the potential for a good game again. With Juwan Jennings, I think last week is to expect a game like last week would be completely ridiculous. But to his credit, he was incredible last week. Obviously, I want to see more than one game of that before just vaulting him way up in these rankings. We've seen this before from players in good offenses where they'll just have these random games where they just go off. And so I do expect to be fair to him, though. I do expect Brandon Ayuk to mostly receive the coverage of Gonzalez, but I don't know that Gonzalez will, per se, shadow him. And overall, it is an above matchup for him, but I just would temper expectations until we see consistent dominance from Juwan Jennings. Wide receivers that I think are probably wide receiver 2s in general, but could finish all over the place in terms of their finish as wide receiver 2s, but definitely have upside if they score a touchdown, for instance, to be maybe low-end wide receiver 1s, but I wouldn't project it, are George Pickens, Brian Thomas Jr., Tyreek Hill, Rome Odunze, T. Higgins, Jordan Addison, DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, and Zay Flowers. George Pickens, this is the best matchup he's going to have. The Colts defense is atrocious. I think he gets a couple chunk gains. I don't have him scoring a touchdown. I think that George Pickens is a must start in what should be Justin Fields' best game this season as a passer. So I think chunk gains are going to be a thing for him, but I don't think he scores. BTJ is playing Houston this week. It's a plus matchup. They've gotten roasted by wide receivers. I think he does score a touchdown here. He's coming off a 9-target game. I made a video after his week 1 performance where I broke down his film, suggesting that he might already be wide receiver 1 for them. And now, as to what that necessarily entails in this offense, isn't as much upside as you might hope, but he is a very good player. He looks crisp. He gets open with the best of them in terms of the rookies so far. He wins on all 3 levels of the field, and he's so elusive after the catch with maximizing his yardage. I've been thoroughly impressed with BTJ so far, and so I think he scores a touchdown, and I really like him this week. Tyreek Hill against Tennessee, with Snoop Huntley at the helm for them, I do think there is more upside, but it's a poor matchup, and until we see production with a non-Tua quarterback in Miami, I would temper expectations for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Rome matches up against the Rams. It's a plus matchup. He showed incredible upside in week 3. He could have easily gone for 200 and 3 touchdowns if Caleb didn't overthrow him on 2 what probably would have been long touchdowns. And so I think Rome Odunze is going to work himself up to the wide receiver 1 role in this offense in terms of the X. Now, as to whether he or DJ Moore is going to be more targeted in any individual game is just going to be matchup dependent, whatever they choose to do. But I do think he is going to firmly establish himself as, at the worst, the second wide receiver in this offense. And yeah, I think they're going to throw a ton in this game and have a lot of success overall as a team. T. Higgins faces off against the Panthers. T. Higgins didn't have quite the game that we were hoping for in terms of his ending counting stats, but he could have had a much bigger game in this past week. And so I think we have a decent game from him this week. I don't project a touchdown, but I think he gets a good amount of volume. Jordan Addison against Green Bay. I think we, just like with T. Higgins, get a good amount of volume, but I don't think we score a touchdown this week. It'll be interesting to see, with Justin Jefferson being there and Sam Darnold at the helm for them, how their target shares play out. I obviously would be much more worried about Addison than Jefferson, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And so I think that there's probably a decent floor, but I think the ceiling is a little bit capped. With DJ Moore, it's just like with Rome Odunze, it's a fantastic matchup. I think you have to start them with confidence. They're going to throw the ball quite a bit. I think they'll have success as a team. And I think he and Rome Odunze are going to switch off games in general in terms of being the wide receiver 1 in terms of their target share. Amari Cooper against Las Vegas. He absolutely went bonkers this last week after failing to do very much in the first 2 weeks. It's a great matchup against Las Vegas. I don't think he scores a touchdown in this game, but I think he gets a good amount of volume, especially with David Njoku still out. And so I think he's a solid play. Mike Evans against Philly. It's a plus matchup. I would like to see more consistency from him and not so much from Chris Godwin before moving him much higher up these rankings. But he still looks like a pretty good player to me. I think he's just been somewhat unlucky, and I think he still gets treated as the number 1 wide receiver. I think they're going to have to throw the ball a lot to stay in this game. And so if he does end up scoring a touchdown, which I don't have him projected to score, I think he finishes much higher than this. Zay Flowers against Buffalo. It's a terrible matchup. I just think he's going to have a very low ADOT with a lot of receptions, with a decent amount of yards and no touchdown. And so I don't think he's a ceiling play this week, but I think he's a very safe floor play. If you like what you're seeing and hearing, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's an easy and free way to help support the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I break down, besides Thursday night games, predictions for every single NFL game and every single quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end, and put them together into rankings and tier them. So if you like what you're seeing, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you. Wide receivers that I think are probably high-end wide receiver 2s to potentially low-end wide receiver 1s are Jaden Reed, Deontay Johnson, Stephon Diggs, Brandon Ayuk, and DK Metcalf. Jaden Reed is playing in Minnesota. I think he's going to get a couple chunk plays in this game. I don't have him projected to score a touchdown, but he's probably going to get Jordan Love back, and I think you have to be happy. He presents you with a ton of weekly upside as Jordan Love's preferred option. He's going to be schemed rushing attempts, and he's an incredible talent at wide receiver. Deontay Johnson against Cincy. The matchup could be better, but as soon as they took Bryce Young out of the lineup and put Andy Dalton there, Deontay Johnson went ballistic. And so this is what I personally expected out of Deontay. Not that high of a ceiling generally, but I expected a lot from Deontay. But Bryce Young, just as unfortunate as it is to say, so far appears as though he's not going to be able to be successful at the NFL level. There's always a chance he turns it around. But for the skill position player's sake, it's very good that the Red Rifle is now playing quarterback for them. And so I think that raises his floor significantly and his ceiling as well. And so I think he's a reasonably high-end wide receiver 2 in this game. In a better matchup, I'd probably have him just a little bit higher. Stephon Diggs against Jacksonville. This is a smash spot for him. Their defense has been atrocious. I think they pass the ball a lot in this game with Joe Mixon coming back from injury. And so I think he has a pretty good game. Brandon Ayuk is playing against the Patriots. I do expect Christian Gonzalez to potentially shadow him, and so that would definitely lower his ceiling and his floor. But he's still Brandon Ayuk. He's going to get back in the groove of things. He's connected to Brock Purdy and Shanahan, and I think he's going to receive a featured amount of looks this week. It's just going to be up to how efficient he's able to be with them. I do think he scores a touchdown, though. I just don't think that the overall yardage is going to be quite as high as we would prefer from a receiver as talented as he is on a weekly basis. DK Metcalf is up against Detroit. This is going to be a smash spot for every Seattle wide receiver. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton to stay in this game. I love Geno Smith this week, and I love DK Metcalf this week. I think we don't get a touchdown from him, but I think we get quite a few receptions and a ton of yards. Wide receivers that I think are going to be low-end wide receiver ones are Drake London, JSN, and Chris Godwin. Drake London, he is going to play against Lattimore. I don't like that. However, he has improved with every week. He's receiving more volume. Against the Saints, I'd imagine they're going to have to throw the ball extensively to stay in this game. And so I do like Drake London this week. I do think he gets more catches and yards and he doesn't get a touchdown, but I think he's an absolute must start. You drafted him there, so you are almost certainly having to play him unless you're in a dynasty league and he somehow is, your wide receiver 4 or something. But yeah, you have to play him, and I think the matchup could definitely be better, but he's the featured wide receiver in a Ram-style offense, so you're starting him with confidence. JSN against Detroit, I think he gets a lot of receiving work. I do think he scores a touchdown. I think he's the wide receiver that ends up getting the touchdown. There is the potential for a much higher ceiling than this projection. It's going to be contingent on how their wide receiver targets shake up, and even to a degree how involved Noah Fant is. But JSN has a ton of weekly upside, and he has started to outsnap Tyler Lockett. He has in all 3 of the first weeks this year. Chris Godwin is matched up against Philly. I think he's going to get a lot of volume in this game. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think he gets plenty of receptions and a good amount of yardage as well. Wide receivers that I am incredibly confident in being wide receiver ones this week are Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Rashee Rice, MHJ, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. Nico was questionable with a hamstring injury, but he practiced fully and has been removed from the injury report. It's a smash spot against Jacksonville. I think he scores a touchdown. He's a wonderful play every single week. I thought that his ADP would not pay off, but so far he has produced at such an elite level and really destroyed Tank Dell's ADP. And so, yeah, props to Nico Collins. He is looking incredible this season. Chris Olave against Atlanta, he is questionable still. We'll have to see if he ends up playing. At this point, he's 50-50, so assuming he plays, I like him a lot this week. I think they're going to pass a ton against Atlanta, and I think he has a good game if he plays. Rashee Rice against the Chargers. This is not a great matchup, but he is getting so many targets over the short area of the middle of the field, and he's producing so well that you just can't afford to sit him regardless of the matchup. And so I think that he is essentially matchup proof tied to Mahomes in this Andy Reid offense, and he's a must start every single week. MHJ against Washington, this is a smash spot for him. Washington is one of the more favorable matchups in the NFL for wide receivers, and so I think he does score a touchdown and is a fantastic wide receiver one. Amon-Ra against Seattle, it isn't a great matchup, but it's Amon-Ra. The offense is so good, and he's so good that you start him no matter who he's playing. Jay Jetta is against Green Bay. I do think he gets a good amount of Jaire Alexander this week, but it's Justin Jefferson, just like with all these other wide receivers. You just cannot afford to sit them. I think he does have a very good game. I don't think it's one of those 40-point games, but I think he gets a lot of usage in this game. And I think especially with them also having Jordan Addison back, it makes it a little bit more challenging for defenses to put quite as much attention on him as they have in the prior weeks. Jamar Chase against Panthers, he's going to crush the Panthers. He looked fantastic this past week, and I think he starts to get really hot, and I think he's going to have a couple fantastic weeks in a row. And yeah, you're starting him with utter confidence. Wide receivers that I think are probably low-end wide receiver threes are Darnell Mooney, Tyler Lockett, Jacoby Myers, and QJ. Wide receivers that I think are probably mid to low-end wide receiver threes are Xavier Worthy, Garrett Wilson, JMO, Khalil Shakir, Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, and Jawan Jennings. Wide receivers that I think could potentially be mid to low-end wide receiver twos are George Pickens, BTJ, Tyreek Hill, Rome Odunze, T. Higgins, Jordan Addison, DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, and Zay Flowers. Wide receivers that I think are high-end wide receiver twos to potentially low-end wide receiver ones are Jaden Reed, Deontay Johnson, Stephon Diggs, Brandon Ayuk, and DK Metcalf. Wide receivers that I think are more than likely going to be safe wide receiver ones, but probably not elite wide receiver ones, are Drake London, JSN, and Chris Godwin. And wide receivers that I think are must-start studs that have the potential to easily be the wide receiver one overall this week are Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Rashee Rice, MHJ, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. All right, who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Is there somebody that I'm missing from this list entirely that should be on it? Please let me know below in the comments section. With that being said, if you like what you've seen and heard in this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel. Make sure you check out all my other rankings videos. And with that being said, I hope each and every single one of you absolutely crushes every single one of your fantasy matchups in week 4.